Our extension area specialist, Greg Endres, is going to give us updates on timing of weed management in corn and soybeans, correct?
Correct. But with this first stop, I'd like to tell you about a study, actually a very simple study, but an important one. And that is that we're investigating the yield response of both corn and soybean to the initial timing of weed control. You would think NDSU would have had this data years ago, but we don't. We've been actually using data from other states. We thought it would be very important to have our own North Dakota grown data. So that's the basic objective. In addition, a lot of people have been involved with Roundup Ready crops, certainly, and it's made it very easy to rely on strictly post-emergence herbicide application for the weed control. But that's changing, isn't it? We're struggling with the challenges of managing resistant weeds, in particular glyphosate-resistant weeds, and so that's two good reasons for us to conduct this study. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we're doing here, and then share the database that we've completed so far, and then be sure to let you know that we are continuing the database, and I'm not sure when we'll finalize it, but I think it may be completed this year, but we'll see what the data looks like. Here at Carrington, we have both corn and soybean. You probably saw the corn timing of weed control trial at your previous stop, or hopefully you looked at it. The late post applications looked pretty sick. They're yellow and short and ugly. Well, with the soybean trial, we have an untreated check, and then we have a application at planting time with soil products. So with the soil products, we use glyphosate as a burn down in this trial. It will vary based on other years and locations, but this year we used glyphosate to burn it down. This is conventional till, but we had some weeds present. And then we used residual products. We used Zidua and metribuzin, or commonly known as Sencor. We wanted to use those products for some longer-term weed control, and they worked pretty well. We did have rainfall after the application. So this is the key treatment, and then we're comparing it to the various post-emergence timings. And if you can look closely, you see on the orange stakes, we have three basic timings in the soybean, and until this year we had two basic post-emergence timings in the corn. But on the soybean, we're basing the timings on weed height. The first one was when the weeds are in the range of 2 to 4 inches. The second, when weeds were from 6 to 8 inches. And then we got wild with the last treatment, and anywhere from 10 to 12 or taller weeds. And so that's what you're looking at. The very last treatment was applied, oh gosh, about 2 weeks ago. And you can still see, the weed control is good, but there's visually some differences here, and certainly in the corn that's the case. On the corn, in our trial this year at Carrington, we use Balanced Flex and atrazine as our at-plant soil applied product to give us, again, some residual. And then for the post-emergence products, we only use glyphosate here in the soybean, and then on the corn we use glyphosate and status. And that combination worked very well for post-emergence weed control. So what do you think? Looking at the various treatments, which one has the highest yield potential? Well, we'd expect that the one where we started at weed control right at planting time would perform the best. And we'll see what the rest of the season brings us. Certainly was the case last year where we had a dry season here, and we'll see what happens this year, but at least this treatment is off to a good start. And as well as the corn on the soil applied treatment and the early post treatment when the weeds were controlled at 2 to 4 inches tall, visually they look very similar in greenness and height. And then the mid and late post emergence application of the corn, as I mentioned earlier, those plants are looking not so healthy. So on the database we've generated so far, the information can be found in the weed control guide. And for the corn, we've so far compiled 5 trials, and what's interesting is that with that average, we don't see any yield difference between the soil applied, the weed control starting right at planting time versus the early post-emergence application. But we're going to continue the database and see if maybe that will change. Certainly there's differences though when we waited for the weed control in the corn for the weeds to be 6 to 9 inches tall. The average of the 5 trials, 16% yield loss. With the soybeans, we have 4 trials where we compiled the data so far, and comparing the early post to the soil applied, so far we have about a 2% yield advantage with the soil applied. And then with the intermediate post-emergence application compared to soil, we're losing on average with those 4 trials 6% yield. And then with the late application, the average is over 20% yield loss by waiting that long. So, as I mentioned, we got the 2 trials here at Carrington. We have 2 other soybean trials in the state, one at Langdon and one at Minot at the North Central Research Extension Center. And then we have 1 other corn trial, and that's up at Minot as well. So if we're successful with our trials this year, we'll have a total of 7 trials for corn and 8 for soybean. And that may be enough to draw our conclusion. But what we've learned so far, and it should be no shock to you, is that we strongly recommend starting weed control at planting time to optimize yield and also optimize your ability to control weeds, in particular our herbicide-resistant weeds. That's our story today, and I don't think that's going to change when our database is completed.